Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In chapter 25, Seneca has a very interesting and useful short discussion about getting angry over little stuff, we could say, things that really shouldn't be getting to us. We have this great expression in English, that a person either does or doesn't sweat the small stuff. And I think that's effective in conveying as an idiom what it is that Seneca is talking about here. And the terms that he's going to use, and he actually says this sort of like leading into something else. From this, it also follows that very trivial and petty matters will not aggravate us. And he's talking about, building habits of not being bothered. But there's a long discussion here. So trivial and petty matters, rebus is matters here. Minimis, trivial is a good translation. We get the word minimal from this, things that really don't matter at all. And then petty, right? Sordissimisque, right? Very petty, we could say, sordis, things that we shouldn't even be paying attention to. The stuff that doesn't matter. We could say, well, it's really important to pay attention to detail, and sometimes it is, but a lot of times it really isn't, and people get themselves all worked up over stuff. Now, this is not the only discussion of trivial and petty matters on anger. There's all sorts of other examples, but he's got them concentrated in this chapter, so this is well worth thinking about. And he's going to tell us that getting angry over matters of this sort is actually crazy, insania, right? The word that we get insane or insanity from. And remember that Seneca in Book 1 talked about anger as a sort of temporary insanity. It leads us astray. He goes so far as to say anger will get angry at the truth itself if the truth contradicts it. So once we let ourselves get riled up over these little things, we're in bad shape. And he starts out by talking about some domestic matters. And, we could think about contemporary examples. A slave is not quick enough. Okay, so unless you're doing something really illegal and immoral, you don't have slaves. But we do go to places where we engage with people who are, at least in respect of the sort of transaction that we have, inferior to us. And we want them to be Johnny on the spot and attentive to us. People who work in retail, people who work in restaurants, customer service people, they put up with a lot of crap. They have a lot of different people to deal with. You're not that special. And if you want them to treat you as if you are super special, and you're not paying them a ton of money, you're going to some mid-grade restaurant, well, surprise, surprise, if they're not going to be super prompt and super attentive, right? The water is too hot to drink. Well, just wait a couple minutes and then you can drink it, right? It's sort of like complaining about your tea or your coffee, whatever else it is, your frou-frou drink at Starbucks. Ooh, this is too cold. Well, give it a couple minutes and it's not going to be too cold. Ooh, this is too hot. Well, dummy, then don't drink it right now. We could also say this about pizza, that you don't eat the pizza immediately, you let it cool off, otherwise it burns the roof of your mouth. And so if you're going to get yourself all worked up about that, that's really kind of foolish. He talks about the bed being mussed. Some people are really particular about how they want the bed made, or the, blinds have to be drawn a certain way, or the curtains have to be hung a certain way, or pick any other thing that you want, or the table is carelessly set. The knives and forks and spoons aren't set so that they're exactly parallel, or the dishes are slightly off, or a dish is cracked. Can you imagine that? Or, God forbid, the dishes don't all match each other perfectly. People do get upset about these sorts of things, and all sorts of other matters as well within the household, in terms of their vehicles, in terms of, their technology, their laptop is dirty, the update is taking too long to run, pick any of these sorts of things. And so then he's going to go on and talk about some of the sources of this. So weakness and sickliness are an example. Someone who a slight breeze has made shiver is weak and sickly. If they're going to let that get to them, the wind blowing, a geographic feature that's been here, I think basically since we had a world that we call Earth, and it's probably going to outlive us. If a breeze is bothering you, you're in rough shape. Eyes that a bright white garment offends aren't healthy. And you might think about people who are hungover and how upset they get. You're breathing too loud. The sun is too bright. Well, that's because you're not in decent shape, right? And then he talks about luxury. And here we're going to get to something a bit more. A person whose own back feels pain at another's toil has been made effete by luxury. Effete means, weak, right? Dissolutus is the Latin term delicious. Delicious are the things that we delight in. And then he's got this really funny example. They say that Mindyrides from the city of the Sybarites, legendary for indulgence in all sorts of things, complained that he was becoming exhausted when he saw someone digging and lifting his hoe too high, and he forbade him to work in his sight. The same man complained that he felt worse when he lay down on rose petals that were creased. Now, rose petals smell nice, they look nice, they're pretty presumably soft if you're laying on a bed of rose petals, but if they're folded, well, that's not good, right? It's sort of like the old story of the princess and the pea who's laying on, I forget whether it's 10 mattresses or 100 mattresses, and she can feel a tiny pea at the bottom of that. If your body is so worn out by indulging in sensual luxuries that these things bother you, you're going to get angry pretty easily. So he goes on and he says, when pleasures have corrupted, pleasures is voluptates, have corrupted both mind and body, then nothing seems bearable, tolerabile, right? Nothing can be tolerated, borne with. You're going to have a reaction to it instead. And here's a great line. Not because of the hardness of the thing, qua duris, not because the thing itself, the experience itself, is hard for us, but the softness of the person who is having the experience, quia mollis patitur, right? A weak, a soft, self-indulgent person is experiencing this thing. It's happening to them. Things that other people wouldn't be bothered by. You get onto a bus or a train, or you're even in a car, and you go around a curve or hit a bump or something. Well, it's going to bump, right? You're going to be leaning to one side if you're like, oh, you've got to stop that, take it easy. Well, that's really on you. And there's all sorts of things that could raise trouble this way. Again, he gives you some great example. Why should someone's cough or sneeze send you into a frenzy. Now, it's one thing if they're like coughing their lungs out and spitting on the floor, and you're like, hey, man, that's gross. I don't want to be in the same place as you while you're coughing like that. I don't want to get sick. Or sneezing constantly. You might be like, we got to take you to the doctor. There's something wrong with your nose. But a single cough, a single sneeze, you're going to get upset over that? I mean, here's a funny example. We would often go to the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra. And, it's a big hall, beautiful place. It's been redone recently. Excellent acoustics. It's a wonderful place for the orchestra to play. And there's also singers occasionally. And sometimes there'll be a pause, and you can hear somebody in the back coughing, right? And they're recording it some of the time, too. Well, that's just human nature. I mean, you put 200, 300, 400 people in a room, somebody's going to cough sometime, right? Somebody's going to blow their nose. Somebody's probably going to inadvertently say something or break wind or get up and squeak their chair or something along those lines. Same thing with the orchestra, right? The orchestra, not everybody is going to play every single note right all the time because they're not machines. And that's okay. You don't let those small things get to you. He talks about a fly chased too negligently. So it's not even you chasing the fly. You want somebody else to chase and kill that fly that is bothering you. You don't even get up yourself and get the fly swatter and swat it. You're like, you need to get that fly, take care of it right now. Another great example, a dog that has got underfoot. Dog, cat, could be anything, right? That gets underneath your feet as you're walking along, and oops, I'm tripping a little bit. Damn dog, get out of here. Well, did you think the dog was trying to trip you? No, it was just like going for its food, or maybe actually trying to get out of your way, and you blundered into them. The same thing when you're walking up to a person on the street and you both go the same way. You do that little dance. You get mad at them? That would be kind of silly to do. A key that slipped from the hands of a careless slave. You might think about being at a hotel. You're checking in. They give you your keys. The key falls on the floor. Ooh, I'm mad. You should have been more careful in handing me the key. No, dummy, just bend down and pick up the key. It ain't that big of a deal. Right? So these are, some great examples. And Seneca goes on and he says, listen, if you can't handle these little things, what are you going to do when you're faced with bigger things? So he says, will someone whose ears are bruised by the scraping of a bench being dragged bear with equanimity other kinds of sounds like the abuse of public life and the curses heaped on him in an assembly or the Senate? I don't think so, right? Will someone who becomes angry when a slave does a bad job of melting the snow? Now, what's that about? Okay, so the Romans, they had ice houses, and they'd also send people to go get snow from like mountaintops, and they would have, little delicacies like sherbets and, cool things like that. That's a luxury. Big, big luxury, right? If you're upset because your servant is taking too long to make you the special dish that you want, melting the snow, how the hell are you going to endure real hardship, like hunger and thirst in a summer campaign? Now, a summer campaign, not a marketing campaign, a military campaign. Putting on your armor, going out there, getting ready to fight. If you're going to get upset over little, discomforts, you're not going to make it in the military at all. So he says, nothing feeds anger more than luxury. And here, I want to pause on the words that are actually being used here, because there's kind of a little, what you might call it, Easter egg from Stoic moral philosophy. So here's the translation. Nothing feeds anger more than luxury that's out of control and incapable of forbearance. What are the Latin terms being used there? Intemperance, right? So this is a vice. This is the opposite of temperantia, which can be translated as, if you want to translate it directly as temperance, that's fine. Usually it's more often translated as moderation. What's the difference? They occupy a lot of the same ground. That is either the virtue of temperance or one of the sub-virtues of temperance, and you're saying this person lacks that. Because they indulge in luxury, they lack that. What is incapable of forbearance? Impatience. Patientia in Latin, another one of the sub-virtues of the cardinal virtue of courage. So we often translate patientia as endurance. They're unable to display endurance towards the things that, sort of like something is not tolerable, they cannot bear with it, right? So what he's saying here is that luxury, when we're not paying attention, really has a great risk of making us badly off with respect to temperance and with respect to courage, two of the key virtues for the Stoics. And then we get angry because we can't handle the pain or even lack of pleasure that is coming with that. So what is the advice that he gives? Really, we need to treat our mind roughly. Dura is roughly. Tractandus, treatment, right? Animus est. Animus is the mind. So the mind itself needs to be treated roughly. And why is that? So it only feels a serious blow. So little trivial things, trivial and petty matters, aren't going to get us all upset and worked up. He's not saying that you can't get worked up about anything. I mean, it would be nice if you didn't. But at least if you're going to get upset over things that actually do seem to matter, at least to the ordinary run of normal people who can handle minor setbacks in life, and you'll be much better off as a result.